All right, up on the big screen for your viewing pleasure is the male rat, but we're going to do the kind of gross anatomy, just the general anatomy. So this rat, again, is a good rat. This is the poster child male rat for the exam. So pay attention. All the answers will be here in the male portion once we get down there. But before we do the urogenital system, the trachea again is right up here, okay? And the trachea, unless you dissect it out, is going to be laying right on top of the esophagus. So in this rat, the esophagus has been kind of dissected out. So the esophagus is the tube right here below, kind of between the T-pin and the trachea, right? So that's the esophagus right here. On top of the heart is a big gland called the thymus gland. Most of the time we remove it so you can see, the heart a little bit better. And then up at the very top of the trachea, kind of where the larynx is, which would be our voice box, you can kind of see there's like a little thyroid gland right up in here. So that would probably be the last thing that I would want to ask, in a rat dissection. I have to pick out, so your lab exam is going to be about 30-20. 30 points practical, 20 points in the written part, okay? So I have all of this animal diversity and bones and dissections to pick out 30 items to test you on, right? That's a lot. So if I'm going to ask something on the rat, I'm not going to ask some obscure thing like the thymus that I could barely stick a pin in it for you to identify anyway. And most people would then say, well, that's the larynx or that's the trachea, and get it wrong. So I'm not going to ask you the thymus or the thyroid, on the test. So the thymus is this big gland, again, that in the little rat, diagram has been removed and is sitting off to the side. And then if you do remove the thymus, then you can see the heart a little bit more clearly. And then you can, these are the lungs right here on this, probe. And then this is the right atrium. And then we have the left atrium over here. The ventricles are going to be inside the heart. The ventricles are chamber, and so you'd have to actually cut the heart in two, which you could do. Slice it this way and spread it open. You can see the ventricles, but I don't want you to cut the heart out because then it's no good for the dissection. And I don't care if you draw the ventricles on the on your lab drawing. All right. So if we do have there's a couple of rats that are not the greatest. So maybe one of those wimpy male rats. We can make a cut from here all the way through with a scalpel, and you can open it up and probably see the ventricles. So again, we have the lungs here, including this. The diaphragm, again, is the muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. And the diaphragm in conjunction with the ribs are going to allow, the compression of the thoracic cavity forces air out. And then when the diaphragm relaxes and goes back to its normal shape, kind of sitting right on top of the liver, then the lungs, can expand and get larger and take in air. So that's the diaphragm there. We have really big liver. And then right below the liver, let's move down a bit. Right below the liver is the stomach here. Right below the stomach is, a piece of tissue that is the same color as the liver, and that's the spleen. And the stomach actually sits in between the liver. So right down here is also liver tissue underneath the stomach. Then we have small intestine, and usually associated with the small intestine is pancreatic tissue. And so this yellowish kind of tissue is fatty tissue. The pancreas is going to be the tissue right here. Okay? So that's this is more fat, and this is going to be more of the pancreatic tissue. So the pancreas, is always going to be associated with the small intestine because it's going to be producing enzymes, the pancreatic enzymes that are going to help digest the food, the macromolecules. The cecum is part of the large intestine, so you have this big sac-like structure called the cecum. The cecum typically houses some of the beneficial bacteria. The human digestive system has a cecum, and off the cecum lies our appendix. And so the appendix is part of your large intestine, and sometimes will get inflamed and fun stuff like that. The large intestine kind of coils around and eventually becomes the colon here. So this is the colon right here that empties out to the anus. And so this poor rat didn't have a last meal, did it? Most of the rats you see have big, swollen colons that have all the fecal matter inside them. Here's the kidney over here, and if you kind of look at the middle of the kidney right in here, you'll see a little kind of clear tube, and this would be the ureter. So this little tube-like structure that runs down here is the ureter. So the two ureters are going to empty into the urinary bladder right here. So they kind of wrap around and go into the back end of the bladder, much like what we have in a human. As part of the male reproductive system, this is the two seminal vesicles. Sometimes they're labeled as vesicular glands, but seminal vesicle is kind of the similar term that we would have in the male reproductive system. And then in front of the urinary bladder are the prostate glands, right? So here's the urinary bladder, here's the prostate, seminal vesicle. And the seminal vesicle, the testes are connected to the seminal vesicle by the vas deferens. So in a male, this would be where a vasectomy would be done. So the vas deferens is the way in which sperm gets from the testes up into the male reproductive system, and then the seminal vesicles are going to add ingredients to the seminal fluids as well as the prostate gland. So these are all considered accessory glands of the male reproductive system. So sperm is produced in the testes, but sperm only makes a small portion of seminal vesicle, or the seminal fluid. And also associated with the testes down here is the epididymis. So the testes is here, and then you have the epididymis that kind of is up on top and down below the testes. It's kind of out of view here. So the testes kind of sit in the scrotal sacs. The scrotal sacs' primary function is to keep the testes at a little bit lower temperature than body temperature, because that's a better temperature for sperm development. So in the male human, they don't develop well at 98.6, so leaving it about a degree or two cooler allows better sperm development. So so a low sperm count could be due to you having too tight of underwear. You're keeping your testes, way up in your scrotum where they're not being sufficiently cooled. Sitting in a hot tub for too long could lower your sperm count. I don't recommend it as a way of birth control, right? So whatever the hot tub leads to, it's probably not going to cause sterility, at least for the evening. So don't say, hey, I got it covered. We've been in the hot tub for an hour, okay? My sperm are dead. You don't know that, okay? That's just a little, locker room humor. I hope I didn't offend anybody. Sorry.
But people do think that, which is the sad.
Yeah, it's, that's how my twins have it. They were accidents. I'm not quite sure how that happened. Right? Darn accident. Huh?
Everyone's an accident.
Everyone's an accident.
On the father's side.
All right, so the scrotal sac, testes, epididymis, vas deferens, seminal vesicle, urinary bladder, prostate gland, kidney, ureter. It's kind of hard to see. You almost have to look at it and
Actually, we don't.
like, yeah, thanks for telling me. I'm looking at the rat, not at the screen, so say, hey, Feaster, wake up. So it's kind of hard to see unless you're actually using the probe and kind of moving it back and forth. You can see this tube. And then you got the spleen, and you've got the colon, liver, stomach. Again, the best place to see the esophagus is actually underneath the trachea. Otherwise, you kind of got to, look, can't see. Now we've lost our light. Dr. Feaster, I need someone to wipe my brow. But you can see the esophagus kind of running through here, maybe, right there, that white tube. So that's the esophagus running from, the throat area down, dorsal to the heart, and then eventually it's going to, hook up into the stomach up here underneath the liver. But that's esophagus right here as well. All right, so again, diaphragm, heart, lungs, right and left atria, trachea, esophagus. I don't know if you had to mark down any salivary glands or anything like that, but there's some really big salivary glands in the kind of the throat regions of the rat. Am I missing anything on that list? Mesenteries, good question. Mesenteries are just all the clear tissues that hold everything together. So you've had to break through these shiny, kind of clear mesenteries. Mesenteries are mesodermal in origin, so it's a type of mesodermal tissue. And so, so the mesenteries are, just kind of these clear tissues that are kind of holding everything together. So there's mesenteries right here. If you can see that clear stuff, looks like snail slime or something. And then there's some good kind of pancreatic tissue right in here that are kind of stuck together and within the mesenteries. And then, this is fatty stuff. So, do we need a female? Yeah? You guys know the female.
You should,
I should do the female too, because I did such a good job